Okay, can we start?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we discussed about Lord Warren Hastings, and we covered the period from 1773 to 85, and then we discussed about Lord Cornwallis and from 86 to 93, right? So during Warren Hastings time, we talked about Regulating Act and then Pitt's India Act. Okay, so Regulating Act of 1773 we have discussed. Pitt's India Act of 1784 we have discussed. So in Regulating Act we have discussed that Governor of Bengal became Governor General of Bengal with 4 council members, and who's appointing the Governor General by the company, 4 members by the Parliament. Decisions were to be taken on the basis of majority, and how this regulation is there and everything I've told you, and the problem with majority also we have discussed. And then second provision was related to the establishment of Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was established in 1774. Don't be confused here. The act is in 73 and the court was established in 74 at Calcutta. Then when we discussed about Pitt's India Act of 1784, we have discussed 3 points. Governor General of Bengal plus 4 became 3. The reason, the rationale behind that I have told you. So the problem with respect to Regulating Act in decision making have been solved with this Governor General plus 3, and we have discussed about the casting vote of Governor General, and then we have discussed about a board of control with 6 members which was established in England, so to regulate the affairs of East India Company in India. So this 3 members sitting in India along with Governor General will regulate, the 6 members sitting in England, London, and then they will regulate the company. We have also discussed about the provision of recall. I've told you the Governor General is appointed by the company. So even though the Governor General is appointed by the company, if the Parliament want to recall any official, Parliament can recall any official including the Governor General. So this is what we have discussed. In Warren Hastings, we have also discussed why his period in history is known as trial and error period. We have also talked about Indology, okay, and we have discussed about 1776 Code of Jendu laws. We have discussed about 1781 Calcutta Madrasa, 1784 Asiatic Society of Bengal, and all these things are covered. When we discussed about Lord Cornwallis, we have discussed about police reforms, 1793, judicial reform, okay, and then civil service reforms, 1793, and then we have also discussed about the permanent settlement. And since we discussed about permanent settlement, we have also covered the other major settlements like Ryotwari settlement and also Mahalwari settlement. Okay, so this is what we have done so far. So in this session we are going to continue the discussion that we have done. So from 1793 to 98, who's going to be the next Governor General? We have discussed this name before when we discussed about permanent settlement. Along with Lord Cornwallis, his deputy, who was Lord John Shaw. So this person name at that time itself, I have told you this person's name you will hear only with permanent settlement and along with Lord Cornwallis. Separately, when we discuss about Lord John Shaw, there is nothing much to discuss, and especially from exam point of view for prelims and mains, if you see, there is nothing. And this discussion of history that I am going to do, it is purely from exam point of view, so I am not interested to discuss about Lord John Shaw. So we are skipping this person. We are looking only for prelims and mains questions, right? So nothing was there from that perspective, so we skip this person. And next is going to be Lord Wellesley. Lord Wellesley, his time period is 1798 to 1805. One of the most important Governor General. As I've told you just before when we discussed about Lord Warren Hastings, he is considered important because he is the first one. He was the first one. And then Lord Cornwallis was important because he have a lot of success story to write in India. And then Lord Wellesley is important because of one policy that I'm going to discuss now. And then Lord Dalhousie, Lord Canning, Lord Bentinck, Lord Minto, Mountbatten. We will discuss all these Governor Generals. Okay, so why Lord Wellesley is famous for, or what is that particular policy that we are talking about? It is a very controversial policy. The policy name is subsidiary alliance. So this policy, if the question is about who introduced this policy, it is not Wellesley. Okay, Wellesley have made some modifications, some changes, and used it in a much vigorous and better way to expand their army presence in India. I'll explain this concept. See, when we discuss about subsidiary alliance, it is basically a military help. Okay, so Wellesley introduced some new elements into this, and it was initially it was a military help. And who's the main of the pioneer of this policy? The main person behind this policy, or the brainchild of this policy. If the question is about brainchild, or if the question is about pioneer, this name we have discussed before, that is Dupleix. Okay, the French governor Dupleix is the pioneer of this policy when he rendered his army to Hyderabad. Okay, so he was a French governor in Pondicherry. So when he first rendered his army to Hyderabad, and that is when this military help concept is coming. So the pioneer of this policy, subsidiary alliance, is actually Dupleix. So subsidiary alliance means it is basically a military help. For example, the kingdom, the local king, let's say Gwalior, was facing a threat from the other local rulers or from any other power. So actually what will happen is the East India Company will deploy the military here. Okay, so East India Company will offer the military help. So this is what actually you mean by subsidiary alliance. So when you talk about subsidiary alliance, it is just the military help. But Wellesley is going to use this policy in a much vigorous and much more better way than what you can see till now. So the point which I want to stress here again and again is subsidiary alliance. If the question is asked about who's brainchild or who's the pioneer of this policy, it is not Wellesley, it is Dupleix. But it is known after Wellesley because he used it. For example, when we discuss about doctrine of lapse later, by which person, by which Governor General we discuss? Dalhousie. And some of the students always have the confusion between doctrine of lapse and subsidiary alliance also. Like people think that Wellesley and doctrine of lapse and Dalhousie and subsidiary alliance, this confusion will be there. No need of that. You can just remember D and D, Dalhousie and doctrine of lapse. So what I want to tell you here is doctrine of lapse was also a kind of policy which was there much before. Among even Indian kings also it was there. Okay, but Dalhousie was the person who used it in a vigorous way, and during his tenure, a lot of such annexations was there. I will tell you what is doctrine of lapse. So, even doctrine of lapse also is not pioneered by Dalhousie, even though it is known after Dalhousie. Exactly in the same way, subsidiary alliance is not the concept of Wellesley. Okay, but it is known after Wellesley because he used it in a much better way from their perspective. Okay, so here if you see here, when the army is kept here, the army will be paid by whom? The army will be paid by the Gwalior king, because the army is actually protecting the particular kingdom, that local ruler. Okay, so this is actually the concept. Now in India, they even allowed the company's army to stay inside also some cases, and you know what it can lead to, or what all things can happen if you allow the company's army to stay inside the territory. The very fence will start eating the crop, right? That's exactly what happened also in some cases. So here, when under Wellesley, the East India Company did this kind of agreement or this kind of treaty with many Indian states, and used this treaty to expand their huge army in different parts of India. For example, let's say this is a country, okay, just like this, and you sign the treaty with the ruler here, everywhere you will sign the treaty. Either the local ruler who's facing the threat will sign the treaty, so you will keep your army here like this to protect. Okay, so everywhere you will keep this army. Either the local ruler, because of the threat, will sign, or the local ruler may be forced to sign the treaty by the East India Company. So there are some instances where they were forced to sign the treaty, otherwise they themselves will sign the treaty. So the entire expenditure of the army has to be taken care by the local king. Now how is it going to benefit the East India Company? See, one more thing that you need to understand here is, at this point of time, they never had any concept of annexation. They were happy with whatever area they had. Okay, so they are not interested in annexation at this point of time. So this policy was not for annexation. This policy was to keep their army everywhere. So the advantage of this policy at this point of time was, you can mobilize a huge army across India, okay, without any expenditure from your side. So you don't want to spend anything from your exchequer, and entire expenditure of this army will be taken care by the local ruler, and you can maintain the army presence across India. And that was the policy. So, and if there is any problem here, they can use this army and this army and this army and this army, and they can suppress it. That is the idea, that they need to keep army across India, that too on the expenditure of the local rulers, not from their exchequer. So that is how this policy is actually treated, and later it actually helped them for annexation. The policy towards the local kings or the local kingdoms or annexation is actually starting after 1813 only. They changed their policy. There was a shift in policy. They started annexing more and more areas after 1813. I'll tell you the reason also for that. So this subsidiary alliance in fact actually helped them for this purpose at that point of time. So right now what I'm discussing is subsidiary alliance is basically a military help which was offered by the East India Company to the local rulers who's facing some threats. It may be the local rulers signing themselves, or some cases the local rulers are forced to sign the treaty by the company. For example, Mysore was forced to sign the treaty, but Tipu Sultan at that time, he decided that he will not sign the treaty. Instead, he went for the war, that is the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. And in this war, Tipu died. And after the death of Tipu, the Mysore signed the treaty. Okay, so that is what actually happened. And in many textbooks, if you see, historians consider the death of Tipu as an honorable death. An honorable death than a dishonorable pact. So Tipu's death in history, if you get a question like this, Tipu's death in history is considered as an honorable death than a dishonorable pact. Discuss. What you need to write here is actually the subsidiary alliance and then the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. I have seen in the test series when people are writing, they are writing first war, second war, third war, everything about the third wars and Hyder Ali, and everything will be written except subsidiary alliance. So here the pact that they are referring to in the question is actually what? It is a subsidiary alliance. So when you are signing this treaty, you are surrendering the sovereignty. I will tell you how you are surrendering the sovereignty. If you see the provisions in the treaty, you will understand that if you sign the treaty, you are surrendering the sovereignty. So Tipu was not interested in signing the treaty because Tipu know that you sign the treaty, you surrender the sovereignty. So instead, he went for the war, that is the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, and he died in the war. And after the war, Mysore signed the treaty. So in that context, it is discussed or it is understood as an honorable death than a dishonorable pact. So if this question is asked, there is no point in writing the first, second and third Anglo-Mysore War. I hope you understood. The question is purely about, the subsidiary alliance pact and this policy and this concept. And then the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. So you need to basically discuss about this in this particular question. But people will write about first war, second war, third war. Do they get any mark? No, 0 mark. That is of no use. Okay, so here now we need to understand what? We need to understand the new changes which were brought in by Lord Wellesley. So Wellesley, I've told you, have made some changes to the policy of duplex, that is just a military help. Now how this just a military help became much more important policy for the British later. So the first point you also can take down along with me actually. So I'll discuss this. The first point is the local Indian state. So the Indian state who's signing the subsidiary alliance, okay, or were forced to sign the subsidiary alliance, had to promise that there will not be any foreigner other than English in their army. Okay, so the local Indian state who signed this treaty or who signed the subsidiary alliance have to make a promise to the East India Company that they will not employ any foreigner other than English in their army. So that is the first point. So the Indian state who signed the treaty means subsidiary alliance, have to make a promise that no foreigner other than English. Okay, so that is the first interference you can see from the English side if you sign the treaty. Secondly, the local Indian state who's signing the treaty also have to promise that in case of any foreign policy, any war policy, any peace policy, they would have to first inform it to the British. So the Indian state who signed the treaty have to promise that in case of any foreign policy or war policy or peace policy, they have to inform it firstly to the British. So here this word, if you see inform, you just inform. When you look into this, it is just inform, but it's not just inform. Okay, so this word inform is very diplomatically used. What does this actually mean? You have to inform it firstly to the British means you effectively have to get the permission from the British. So if you need to sign any foreign policy, any treaty with the local kings, okay, or war policy or peace policy, you have to get the permission from the British. That's how you need to understand this. So this is why I've told you, when you sign the treaty, you are effectively surrendering the sovereignty. And that's the reason why, mainly this is the reason. This is what you can see, that you are surrendering the sovereignty. So that's the reason why Tipu went for the war. When the Mysore state was forced to sign the treaty, I've told you some states were forced to sign the treaty. Why they're forcing the states to sign the treaty? Because they can they don't want to spend anything for the army. They can mobilize the army in the expense of the local king, and the very same army they can use at any point of time when they need. So that is their strategy. So here you are surrendering the sovereignty. So Tipu, when he was forced to sign the treaty, was not ready to sign the treaty. He went for the war. He died in the war, and that's the reason why historians consider his death as honorable death than a dishonorable pact. So that point has to be very clear. If I would not have discussed this point here, I'm sure if I put this question in the WhatsApp group, you all will talk about first Anglo-Mysore War, second Anglo-Mysore War, and third Anglo-Mysore War. This is what exactly happened with 99% of the students. Okay, this is what exactly happened with 99% of the students. People will never see that word pact. What is that pact is talking about? It is nothing but the subsidiary alliance. So the question is purely about subsidiary alliance. It's not about the wars as such. Okay, so for the fourth Anglo-Mysore War, there are many other reasons, but here it is very specific, that is a pact. Okay, now there may be some other pacts also that we will have to discuss when we discuss about Anglo-Mysore wars. Okay, after the third war, some other pact was there, but here in this question, it is this pact is what is actually mentioned, okay, or considered. Now the third point that you need to see under this policy is actually one English resident had to be stationed in the capital of that local state. So one English resident. So this point, if you remember, after the Battle of Plassey also, and after the Battle of Buxar also, I've discussed this point, right? After the Battle of Buxar also, they have kept English resident in the Treaty of Allahabad. If you remember, if you can recall, we have discussed this. After the Battle of Buxar, in the Treaty of Allahabad, we have discussed about the conditions which was imposed upon Awadh, Bengal, and also Delhi. With respect to Shah Alam, what happened, with respect to Shujauddaulah, what happened, and with respect to the Bengal, what happened, we have discussed. So in that, I've told you an English resident had to be stationed in the local state or the capital of that state. In Murshidabad, you need to keep a English resident. I've discussed at that point of time exactly the same. Here, if you sign this treaty, one English resident had to be stationed in the capital of the local state who's signing the treaty, and the entire expenditure of this English resident, the local resident, okay, the English resident had to be taken care by the local king, whether it is the guards, soldiers, the food, clothes, all expenditure has to be taken care by the local king. So these are the 3 points which you need to remember. These are the 3 points which has to be kept by the Indian kings. In return for this, the Britishers promised that in case of any attack, they will protect, the company will protect or rescue them. But they never did this, and they hardly did this. In fact, they attacked the local kings, and they themselves, tried to capture the states. Okay, the very French started eating the crops in a way. And the second promise that they made is they will never interfere in the in the internal matters. They will not interfere in the internal matters of that local state. Again, that promise also they have not kept. For example, if you see when you see the states which signed the subsidiary alliance, Awadh is a local state which signed this treaty, but Awadh was annexed by the British in 1856. We will be discussing this. And Sindh was also a state signed the treaty, and Sindh was annexed in 1843. And in the context of annexation of Sindh, the person who was responsible for annexation of Sindh was Charles Napier. And he made a very powerful statement that we don't have any right to annex Sindh, because Sindh is a state which signed this treaty and we have to protect them. But still we do it. We do it means we will still annex it. And what a kind of rascality it will be. So it was actually a letter which was written by Charles Napier to the then Governor General at that point of time. Okay, so that's about subsidiary alliance. Or subsidiary alliance means it's just a military help, but here this is the military help. If the local king is facing some threats, the British will support them in terms of army, and the army will be fed or taken care by the local king, the expenditure of the army. But Wellesley made some changes. So what are the changes Wellesley made? These are the changes. The Indian state who signed the treaty have to promise that no foreigner other than English would be there in the army. Then the Indian state also have to promise that any foreign policy, in case of any foreign policy, war policy or peace policy, they will have to first inform it to the British, and that's kind of surrendering the sovereignty. And one English resident had to be stationed in the capital of that local state, and the entire expenditure of that local resident, that English resident, had to be taken care by the Indian king or that local state. In return, the Britishers promised that they will protect in case of any attack, and they will not interfere in the internal matters. So that's about subsidiary alliance. The question is about who introduced this policy, or whose brainchild is this policy, or who is the pioneer of this policy. Then what's the answer? The answer is Duplex. But it is known after Wellesley, because Wellesley made all these changes, and Wellesley used it extensively and signed a subsidiary alliance with many states, so that he can expand his army across India without spending anything. So when we discuss about this, we also need to say that, or we also need to see which all states signed the treaty. It is impossible for me to write all the states who signed the treaty, but we will write the important ones, or the first few. Okay, so in 1798, Hyderabad signed the treaty. Okay, 1799, Mysore. So when you write this, you can also write Mysore signed the treaty after the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. And why it is famous? Because in this war, Tipu died. And you can write here along with this again, Tipu's death in history is known as honorable death than a dishonorable pact. And that pact is in this context of subsidiary alliance. 1801, Awadh. Okay, 1802, Peshwa. 1803, Sindh. And you will see later that 1801 Awadh is signing the treaty, and 1856 Awadh will be annexed under the context of misgovernance. Okay, and 1803 Sindh is signing the treaty, and exactly after 40 years, 1843, Sindh will be annexed under different context by Charles Napier. And the statement which I have told you is related to the person who was responsible for annexation of Sindh, who was Charles Napier. So I hope this concept of subsidiary alliance is very clear for all of you. Now, next important fact that we need to discuss under Lord Wellesley is in 1800, a college was set up, that is Fort William College. Okay, so Fort William College was set up by Wellesley. It was constructed on the bank of River Hooghly. So it was important for keeping one of the railway zones of India. And it was actually from this place where the British ruled in India till 1911. In 1911 only, in the Delhi Darbar, the second Delhi Darbar, the first was in 1877 or 78, we will come to that. 1878, I think, during the time of famine, and a lot of issues was there at this point of time, and nationalists protested and all. And in 1911, there was another Delhi Darbar, and in that Delhi Darbar, capital was shifted to Delhi. We will discuss about that. Don't break your head for this point now. So till then, it was from this place only Britishers ruled India. Okay, now why this college was set up? This college was actually set up to train the English officials or the English civil servants, the newly appointed, the young civil servants in the local languages like Urdu, Hindi. Okay, as these were the main languages which was used in those days. So why this college was set up? To train the young civil servants. Even now also, once you crack this exam, in your training you will be trained in local languages, because your cadre will be entirely different, maybe most of the cases, right? 90% of the cases it will be different. So you will be trained in the local language. So exactly the same, 1793 what happened? Civil services was introduced. So newly appointed young civil servant need to be trained in the local language, and mainly Urdu and also Hindi, because these were the more prominent languages which were spoken by the local people at that point of time. So the objective of this college was this. Okay, so the ultimate idea is basically to make the young civil servant to speak and understand the local language. And the first and only principal of this college was John Gilchrist. So why I say only? Because this college was closed in 1802 because of the difference of opinion between board of directors, okay, etc. So this college was closed in 1802. The only principal was John Gilchrist. So
Sorry, sir.
yes, tell me. Now after this, Lord Cornwallis will come again for a few months, and nothing more is actually going to happen. That is the second administration of Lord Cornwallis. So Lord Cornwallis, 1805, and he will die, and then there is nothing much to discuss during this time, so I will actually skip this phase. Okay, there is nothing else there from the exam point of view. And then the seventh person, that is George Barlow, 1805 to 07. Okay, so during this phase also, I can't find anything which is important for exam point of view, prelims and mains. There was a white mutiny, but this white mutiny and all, nobody will ask you in exam, because you see every year there will mutiny means what? It is unrest among the soldiers. It could be either due to the salary, it could be due to discrimination, it could be due to the facility, it could be due to the problem with respect to the seniors. So the mutiny is always common in army, and since it was white mutiny, maybe some discussion was there, but I don't think that any question will be asked from this particular topic. So George Barlow time, white mutiny, that also I am skipping. We are not discussing this. Okay, so next person is going to be very important for us. That is Lord Minto I. Lord Minto I. Why one? This is not his name. Actually, there is one more Minto who's going to come, and that's why this is Minto I, and the next Minto will be Minto II. So 1807 to 1813. And you can see the way history repeat. You see Lord Minto here. Okay, so 1807 to 1813. So exactly after 100 years. If you see 1909, what is that important thing that you need to study in 1909 with respect to history? 1909, what is the significance?
Morley Minto reforms.
Yeah, Morley Minto reforms you will study, right? So at that time also there is a Minto who's going to come. Exactly after 100 years. Similarly, you see 1757 Battle of Plassey, they took the control, and exactly after 100 years they got a shock in 1857, and almost close to 100 year, 1947, we get independence, right? Similarly, again, if you see 1877, there will be huge problems, okay, with respect to Vernacular Press Act. I will discuss all those things. Vernacular Press Act, that means the censorship was imposed on the press, and the journalist will be restricted, and anything if you need to publish, it has to pass through censors. So it was against freedom of expression, and it was a major blot towards the freedom of expression. And almost exactly after 100 years, what happened? Who during this time? Any idea? Indira Gandhi imposed censorship during emergency. So this is how history repeat. Okay, so even Indira Gandhi was actually compared with the Lord Lytton. Lord Lytton, remember, he was one of the most cruel Governor General. He come up with a lot of controversies like Vernacular Press Act, lowering the age of civil services, and Arms Act, etc. Okay, so we will discuss all these things in the coming session. I have just told you the way it is connected, and it will be very easy for you to remember all those things. It's not that history is so difficult. It's very easy for you to remember if you can connect everything, and that's how I used to remember. So, okay, so 1807 to 1813. Now, one that I need to discuss here is there was a Treaty of Amritsar in 1809 with Maharaja Ranjit Singh of Punjab. This we will discuss later. And then the most important one is Charter Act of 1813. Okay, so when we discuss about this Charter Act of 1813, mainly we need to discuss 2 points. The first one is, now the monopoly of East India Company is going to be ended. So till then, East India Company was enjoying monopoly in trade with India. Okay, so complete monopoly was with the East India Company. So this monopoly is now going to be ended because industrialization is at its peak now. Many more industries, many industrialists, many capitalists, they started bribing the parliamentarians, and in fact they passed an act in favor of them so that they all can come to India and establish trade with India. So the competition is so high. So monopoly is ending now, except in 2 items. Except trade with China, that is still their monopoly, and trade in tea products. This is also their monopoly. Okay, so except in this 2, the monopoly of East India Company is going to be ended. Now that is one point. That is very simple. This is very easy to remember. Monopoly ended except in 2 items, and in after 20 years, this 2 surviving monopoly will also be ended in the Charter Act of 1833. So it is very easy to remember, and in fact this was asked in the last prelims also as a direct question. So, but main thing that we need to discuss is the impact of this. Impact, that is very important, and in mains, impact is what you need to write. Now secondly, the second point is also very important, that is related to education. I'll come to this impact just 1 minute after discussing this provision on education. See, this is the first step that the Britishers were taking towards development or improvement of education in India. What they have done is, in this there was a provision with respect to education. So when we discuss about education, you write any essay on education, when you write any answer on education in GS or essay or anywhere, there are certain milestones which you need to remember. 1813 something is happening, that's what we are going to discuss now. 1835 something will happen. 1854 something will happen, 1882 something will happen, and from here education get consolidated and will go in a smooth way. 1813 is what we are going to discuss now. 1835 you will study later Macaulay Minute. 1854 you will study later again Wood's Dispatch, and 1882 Hundar Commission, and then there are many other commissions also, but these are the most important ones which shapes the education policy. Okay, and this year obviously there will be a question related to that anyway, so it can be an essay also. In fact, in 2017, the essay was asked related to education. Okay, so this year also an essay is expected. Minimum, there will be a question in your GS paper 3, and maybe in 1 also, or in essay also, for sure. So if you need to start, you need to start with all these. This is how the education system is shaped. Okay, in 1813 Charter Act, the provision was, the company was directed to spend, that means East India Company was now directed to spend rupees 1 lakh for the purpose of betterment of education in those areas where they have control. So East India Company have control in Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, Tamil Nadu or Madras, and in Bombay. So in those territories they were asked to spend rupees 1 lakh for the purpose of betterment of education. And it will take a lot of time, and they will not spend immediately, and we will discuss that later when we discuss about 1835 Macaulay Minute. But just understand the provision, and this was the first step that they have taken with respect to education or improvement in education. So they have taken the first step towards the improvement in education in India, at least in those areas where they have control. Okay, so I repeat, the company was directed to spend rupees 1 lakh for the purpose of betterment of education in those areas where they have control. Okay, so the first provision was this: the East India Company lost its monopoly except in two items. Now we need to see the impact of this. So you see, the monopoly is ended. Now what is going to be the impact? Monopoly ended, monopoly of East India companies ended means what? Many more new companies are going to come to India for the trade. Okay, now see, the Prime Minister is going everywhere, okay, visiting every country and asking for, foreign direct investment. Okay, so exactly the same thing is what actually going to happen, and inviting the companies to India. Okay, exactly the same is what going to happen now also. But at that point of time, if you see, is this considered as good or bad? It is not considered good, because if you see, if you compare it with the present day, we have a government, we have our own government, democratically elected government, and we have our own rules and system. So if there is any problem, we can take care of the problem, and we are very confident about that, and we have the system for that. But that time we didn't had our own government. Okay, it is a British government, and we didn't had any of the system also to take care of the problem. So at that time, it was not considered desirable. And what happened? What exactly happened is, till then there was a balance between industry and agriculture. Now what is going to happen? All the imported products started coming to India, so it completely replaced the products, the handmade products of the artisans, and it ruined the Indian artisans' life completely. Okay, so the Indian artisans product will not become competitive in the market. Those finished products which are coming from England, which is coming out of machines through the process of industries and industrialization, this Liverpool clothes and Manchester clothes, etc., were not at all, the Indian products were not at all competent with all these products, and it was cheap also, it was finished also, it was good also. So the Indian peasants, struggled to survive. Okay, so, and they lost their job, so their products no value now, and this led to deindustrialization in India. So this is actually the reason why industries are not performing good. If you see, even now also, the contribution of GDP and also in terms of employment, the problem is still there with respect to industry. The contribution is so less. Why it is very less? Because this was the main reason. It led to deindustrialization, and then there was no further scope of development of Indian industries. It got prevented, and then later our policies and all, it got some boost, but still from 1813 onwards there was no scope for the development of Indian industries. Everything was imported, and especially after the railways, it was over. The finished products started reaching to each and every corner of India. Okay, that means the artisans totally suffered, their life was totally ruined, and if you see, that is the reason why they participated in 1857 revolt and in the complete freedom struggle. So the main point that I want to discuss is 1813 Charter Act. This is the impact that it led to deindustrialization. One more impact is there that is also very important, that I will discuss tomorrow. When we discuss about Lord Hastings, there was a change in policy, and in fact that change in policy, just before also I have told you this, 1813 onwards something is going to happen. They're going to start annex areas. Annexation will start, and that is because of 1813 Charter Act, because they need market and they need raw material. I'll come to that tomorrow when we discuss about Lord Hastings. Okay, so here the point is 1813 Charter Act. These are the two most important points that you need to remember, that end of monopoly except in two items. What is the impact that led to deindustrialization? There was a balance between agriculture and industry during Mughal time and even before also, but now that balance is broken. Now it is predominantly agriculture. And also this led to disguised unemployment, because all these artisans who lost their job, they have no other way but to come to the land. Okay, so these rural landless laborers actually increased, and that led to disguised unemployment, whose marginal productivity is zero. Marginal product is zero. So marginal product is zero means what? For example, this much land, 5 people can work and can make 1 quintal. 5 more people are working, still 1 quintal is the outcome. So the marginal product of this 5 is zero. That's what you call as disguised unemployment, or it can also be understood as underemployment. So this was actually the main problem, or the impact of what? The Charter Act of 1813. And the second is related to education. So that's about Lord Minto 1. We will discuss about the next Governor General tomorrow.